All right, so the two announcements are just that the retreat with Don starts uh, Friday 6 p.m. EST on May 2nd, and we'll go through the evening just for 3 hours and talking and meditation on the four bases of. They're sometimes called the four bases of psychic power, and other places they're called the four bases of spiritual power. They're zeal, or another common word for that is just motivation. It's a practice or a motivation for awakening and dharma. The other one's intent. Investigation. So we'll get into the four bases over the weekend, and it'll be quite a bit of meditation as the last retreat with Don was like. So after the retreat with Don, so the next day on May 5th, the 6 Bardos cycle will begin, and that'll be the subject of everything for the next half year. So it'll combine the Mahamudra, nature of mind, radiant presence teachings that are already standard here. I'll combine that with dream yoga and the teachings on the Bardos by Pablo transitional states, dreaming, waking life, meditation, the birth. So the 6 Bardos cycle. Is that it's a continuation of the higher self yoga teachings that some of you were here for. Definitely James and Stephen were here for, I think about 2 years ago now. So we won't be revisiting the techniques that were taught in higher self yoga, but we'll be emphasizing doing a lot of emphasis on a state called hypnagogia and its brother or its sister called hypnopompia. I just really like to refer to both of them as hypnagogia. It's just this in-between state that you experience between being awake and being asleep, and emerging from sleep into wakefulness. It's just that the window or the transition is subtle, and we tend to lose consciousness in that transition. This whole cycle itself emphasizes the importance of transitional states, transitions between states. Why? It's because in the transition between states, that's exactly when we lose awareness or lose consciousness. In the waking state, when we transition from being in meditation to doing an activity, we lose awareness. When we transition from being awake to being asleep, we also tend to lose consciousness. I mean, 99% of people lose consciousness. Otherwise, you're in a lucid dream, or you're in dreamless sleep with awareness, which is a thing. People do experience that. The aim of the Higher Self Yoga series was to point out to all the students at the time, and then also people that have found the channel since. Surprisingly, I've had emails from people that went through the entire Higher Self Yoga series, even though it's so far back in the channel log. The point of Higher Self Yoga was to get in touch very directly with guidance. There is a principle that organizes synchronicity, and principle that tends to put you in the right place at the right time to receive the right teaching or to go in a specific direction and unfolding. And often we get very generic answers for what what that is. You know, some people just say, "Oh, it's God, it's your guides, it's your ancestors, it's your higher self." And in my case, this principle was in my dreams. So in a dream that becomes lucid or that goes lucid and then turns into an out of body experience, is that there's often a fluctuation or something that's not quite right about that dream that triggers your lucidity. So an example of this that happened a few months ago was I fell into a lake or something, and I had my my backpack, or I had the satchel that has my laptop in it, and so I fall into this lake, and I'm like swimming in the lake, having to get to the shore, and of course all the technology in the bag is soaked, but a portion of the laptop was sticking out of the bag, and that portion had a light that was blinking. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, yeah, that's impossible. There's no way that a light be blinking with a completely soaked laptop. So then I realized that I was dreaming, and then I phased from the dreamscape into what I call the mainframe, or this metaprogramming level of reality. And yeah, and then things happen from there. So this archive of information that I've called the mainframe, or Edgar Cayce calls it the akashic records. There's different names for this particular plane of consciousness. But what you find in that plane is that it's that information is managed by higher parts of oneself, or you could say you're a part of that higher self or that higher intelligence. The Higher Self Yoga series was aimed at contacting and experiencing this intelligence that you're basically a node, that you're a part of through lucid dreaming and OBE. The reason that I'm mentioning this in relation to the 6 bardos cycle that we're going to be doing is because this same principle is also manifesting itself in that context. So when Edgar Cayce accessed this metaprogramming level and was able to see the past and see the present and see the future and get diagnostic scans on people's health issues and what they needed to be healed. He called that information field the akashic record, and that the information appeared to him in a garden. So he'd be in a garden, old man would open this book, and the past and the future would open. the information that is experienced in spiritual states and in mystical states aggregates itself in accordance to the perceiver or the subjective consciousness unit that is accessing it. So to me, it looks like a spaceship or a mainframe because I'm a 21st century person. To Edgar Cayce, it's these portals or realities that are emerging from a book that a man is holding in a garden. When I enter that level, there's these beings sitting around a table that manage the information and manage many, many, many incarnations. My incarnations, past, present, future. From that level, they're all happening simultaneously. So I see that as when I am there or have appeared there, there are these beings sitting around a table. And it's a very technological looking scene. But Hafez, when he entered this higher self level or higher self plane, he described it as a circle of dervishes twirling in devotion to God, and that he was them, or that they also were him. In Tibetan versions of this phenomena, you'll hear discussions about pure lands or realities that are described in very Tibetan Buddhist ways and in forms. What's become clearer and clearer is that appearances don't actually have a solid nature. And this is very clear in the Tibetan teachings as well. If I'm to walk to a river and I look at the river, I see a river of water. But if a hungry ghost was to look at that river, they would see a river of pus. If a hell being was to look at that river, they would see a river of fire. If an angel or a deva was to look at that river, they would see a river of ambrosia or nectar. And if a Buddha was to look at that river, maybe he wouldn't see anything at all. Just kidding. So, what the way that things are configured, the way that things appear, depends on what's looking at it. And this, of course, applies to higher dimensional states and higher insight knowledges, higher realities. In the classic Western literature of near-death experiences, you find people often reporting the appearance of angels or the appearance of guides at death, or the appearance of their departed loved ones, for example, that ushered them into their next incarnation. But if you're a Tibetan and you've received this peaceful and wrathful manifestations teaching, and of course, being a person from that culture, what you'll experience at death configures and colors, it conditions what it is that is perceived and how things appear in the after death state. The benefit, though, of this particular cycle of teaching, this the 100 peaceful and wrathful manifestations, is that you're told in advance that the first manifestations of intelligence will be peaceful, and they'll attempt to get you to awaken from the dream of being in the after death state. One of the issues with dying is this phenomena of amnesia. If you don't die with a very, very clear mind, it's possible for confusion to set in. And confusion in a dream can be similar to the confusion experience at death or after death. So you have these intelligences manifestations of your nature in the same way that you're a manifestation of that, appearing to you to help you awaken from essentially the dream of being in the Bardo, the dream of being dead, or the dream of having undergone the dying process, even the dream of having lived a human incarnation. So with this particular cycle of teachings, those manifestations, when they appear, you have been trained and you're told to recognize them as none other than manifestations of your own nature, manifestations of your own mind. And if you're able to regard what appears as nothing other than your mind, then you're able to break free from the illusions that will impress themselves upon you, or can impress themselves upon you leading up to death, at the moment of death, and after death. Here's an example of something that can happen. If you have the religious conditioning and belief that you're judged after you die, the conviction of that belief and the power of that conviction, the power of any guilt that you actually had during your waking incarnation, that can manifest in the Bardo, in the after death transition, after the after death process. So you're in the same way that let's say you're awake, right, and you were worrying all day. It's possible that you'll have worries in your dreams. If you were in a distress situation during the day, you'll have nightmares that are distressful. If you have you have distress situation for many months, you have nightmares for many months. The reason the moment of quality of mind at the moment of death is so important is because it acts as the launching pad to the next incarnation, or acts as a launching pad to the next existence. So that transition needs to be very clean. It's best to really pass away in peace and in presence and in Mahamudra, in non-duality and union, whatever it is we want to call it. The reason that's important is because if a person passes away with lack of clarity and with confusion and with distress, that can create this tunnel effect. Why is it that the peaceful manifestations are the first to appear? It's because if you're dying, or if you have died and you're freaking out, it's the angelic appearances, the peaceful appearances, the holy appearances that are able to calm you. Many of you may have had the experience with meditation or with plant medicines, or psychedelics, of this fear of dying, this fear of psychosis, for example. So if that fear was the case when you actually weren't dying, imagine what it can be for some people when they actually are dying. It's true, of course, a lot of people die happy, but a lot of people also die in fear and in confusion or uncertainty. So that's why the peaceful manifestations are the first line of defense. They're the first intelligences that attempt to either guide you to a pleasant afterlife destination, or first line of intelligence's reminders to have you wake up and actually become conscious of non-duality and then recognize the clear light. Experience enlightenment in the after-death state. So back to the point where I was making about these possible sub-realities or these possible, basically they're, like in one sense they're hallucinatory, but in the other sense, there's actually beings that execute these functions. So it's like you get plugged into a specific kind of hallucination, and that hallucination, the beings that are performing those activities, yes, they're not apart from your mind. Nothing is apart from mind. Nothing is apart from consciousness. At the same time, these things have their own independent existences in the same way that you have in the waking state with people that you interact with. The after death state is no different than than the state of the living. Just the nature of beings and the nature of appearances there can be different. So let's talk about the example of someone that has the very strong conviction that they will be judged for their sins. So that conviction, that belief, actually, and the guilt, whatever, the shame, the regret, those emotions and those afflictions actually pull them like a resonance effect. You know, you're essentially vibrating, you're essentially emanating and resonating that particular energy. So you get pulled into a reality of that nature. And so you find yourself in a place and there's this being in front of you, and he opens a book and he starts reading all the things that you did wrong. And the peaceful manifestations are involved in every scene. They're attempting to get you to realize that what's happening is not actually real. If you're able to have the clarity that there was no self, or that there was no person that actually performed any action or any sin, then you can have recognition and dissolve into the clear light. So that's the purpose and the gem, really, of the teachings on emptiness and the teachings on the Bardo, that every single transition between this incarnation and the next plane, there will be experiences that are opportunities for recognition of your nature, and then appearing in the pure abodes or the planes of the bodhisattvas. So those are very exalted levels of existence. They're not like the standard afterlife territories that most of the earth religions talk about. So the realization that is possible in the Bardo is the same as the realization that's possible in waking life. What is it that someone realizes in waking life when they have awakening? They realize they're not a person. They make the same statements. Oh, it was all a dream. It was just a dream. It was just a dream. The sense that they were a doer and that they either took actions or had actions impressed upon them, that sense is dispelled, or seen through, and the possibility for that is indeed there in the Bardo experience, or in the afterlife transition. what happens to people once they pass away, and I'm reporting this from my um, out of body experiences where I've observed this process, or I was plugged into a consciousness and experienced its death through its perspective, is that what occurs at the moment of death and after is dependent on the level of consciousness of that being and the amount of, let's say purity or light that they were holding or that was in them up to that time. So a person who dies at peace and dies in contentment and dies happy or dies laughing in the face of death, that's a very different death compared to dying in confusion and dying in uncertainty and fear. And that, in the same way that your waking state will condition your dreaming state, your living state conditions your dying state. So to pass away in confusion, or to pass away in fear, or to pass away in regret, what happens at death is this massive, the clear light dawns, the five elements dissolve, the body dies, and this massive amount of light explodes in the etheric body. I mean, you see the entire system light up. It's like a metal that becomes so hot it starts emanating light. There's so much light in the system. And some people, if they're conscious when this is happening and they're not prepared for it, they actually fear to it. It's such an overwhelming, shocking phenomenon. That they have certain beliefs like, oh, I'll be judged for what I've done. This light will annihilate me, and I may appear in an unfortunate place. These are the kinds of misperceptions that we can have at the time of death because we haven't navigated dream states and transition states and things like this. So the quality of mind at the moment of death is absolute of paramount importance. And the teaching in many traditions is to think of the guru at the moment of death. So many Tibetans, when they die, they'll think of Padmasambhava, they'll think of the teacher that they knew or their guru that they knew, or they'll think of Avalokiteshvara, Mahayana Buddhists, they'll think of Amitabha. The idea is that you would wonder, like, why would you leave that as instructions in sacred texts and in teachings? Why POA, for example, the transference of consciousness into the deity, to the heart of the deity at the time of death? What's the function of that? It's that in the moment of death, whatever is on your mind becomes 10,000-fold amplified. So if you die in peace, it's 10,000 times the peace that was of the waking state, or of that you knew while you were living. If you die saying goodbye, I love you, and there's happiness in that, you die with 10,000 times the amount of love and of letting go. So if you die with the guru on your mind, or if you die with the deity on your mind, that explosion of light catapults you into that reality. And those deities and masters, gurus, they are masters of life and death themselves. They're masters of reality. And by plugging these little instructions and these little keys into the various teachings and into the various texts and sadhanas, they're basically able to cast a net, so that when you die, you upload yourself into their network, and then you're able to appear in a fortunate place where dharma is being practiced and wisdom is still unfolding and compassionate activity is still engaged. That's really what it is. When they say that the mantra is the deity, it's the same meaning. When you use the mantra, you plug into the mandala, you plug into the dimension of that deity, of that omniscient being. And by proxy, you're escorted. Your consciousness unit is uploaded and put into another folder where greater learning and service can continue. So this is why the instructions or the teachings say the name of the deity at death, or think of the guru at death. Even the physical guru, the human guru that you knew, is a manifestation of a greater principle and a greater intelligence. And by thinking of that person, you actually touch and you touch the deity that they were, or the emanation. They were an emanation of, oftentimes, for example, a leader of a lineage or the leader of a tradition is generally referred to as a divine incarnate. So many of the great spiritual teachers are actually emanations of Shiva, even if they don't know it. Shiva is not this blue thing with cone hair on his head and a serpent on his shoulder. That's a fabrication. That's a way to appear to humans in something that's understandable and something that looks like them. Shiva is the principle of awakening itself, incarnate and in a specific high-level consciousness unit that we're calling Shiva, that is able to emanate countless forms and countless realities. They say emergent from the Dharmakaya, or emergent from the fundamental reality, emergent from the fundamental basis, are the 5 or 6 Buddha families. And from those 5 or 6 Buddha families, from those 5 or 6 fundamental intelligences, you have the retinue of deities that then generate their emanations. And the truth, or the secret of the Bardo teachings and of the Tibetan teachings in general, is that all beings are actually emanations of deity, emanations of these very, very high levels of intelligence. And that our whole process through samsara is simply just remembering what it was we were before this dream of time began. You'll notice when you compare the Bardo teachings to things that are described in near-death experiences and things that are described in non-Buddhist traditions when it comes to what happens in life after death, is that there are general themes. So there's general themes, but how those themes are expressed is different depending on the culture. So an indigenous culture, when they die, they may experience their elders or indigenous relatives appearing. If a modern Christian passes away, they may experience the appearance of angels with wings and this sort of stuff. The way that your guiding intelligence, your higher self, and your helpers appear to you will have to be in something that is recognizable, intelligible, and understandable for you. If you're dying or if you have died and they appear to you as a leprechaun or a snake, that would not be good for your state of consciousness, which is delicate after it has passed away. It can be, your consciousness can be bright as an ocean of 10 billion suns, or it can be as dim as an ember in a very, very, very dark forest. It just depends on how you lived. It depends on how you died. So that is all taken into account. And because of the variance in life and death, there's variance in afterlife outcomes and in afterlife processes. So, for example, if at the moment of death you think of the deity, or if at the moment of death you actually recognize the clear light, realize that this whole thing was a dream, you're sucked back into your higher self, and you appear in this dimension of pure infinite intelligences, all communicating with each other, whatever, right? If you're able to actually recognize and get what is happening, and you have the clarity of mind and the relaxation and the surrender to do so, then you don't necessarily need to use things like remembering the form of the teacher, or you know, transitioning, thinking of some deity, that some form of the deity that you barely even know. That wouldn't be appropriate. But um, if you are able to uh, die in awareness, or die in realization, pass away in full clarity and the natural state and surrender and happiness and all this, and when the clear light dawns, you're ready for it. But and in doing so, everything that would come after the peaceful manifestations, the wrathful manifestations, none of that happens. So the clear light occurs, you appear back in the realm of pure intelligence, of the higher self, of the Sambhogakaya, and you decide whether you take a human birth again, whether you uh, or whether you remain in that particular existence. So the the process of being able to um, pick a reality is very different for a person that has died in conscious awareness and in non-duality, compared to a person that is dying in confusion. Ideally, even if they die in confusion, even if they have fear and worry and anxiety at the moment of death, if they have the Bardo's teachings, or if they're able to remember the guru's instruction or remember the mantra of the deity, then boom, that's your ticket. That's your ticket out of the Bardo of death, in the sense that you won't be subject to what would occur otherwise. So if you died in confusion, but you were able to uh, have a moment of clarity afterwards, and memory and recollection was able to kick in because you were a practitioner during your life, boom, you say the mantra of the deity, you're phased to another plane. Where someone who doesn't have that, they pass away and they're in confusion, that confusion pulls them to a reality that corresponds to it. You get what you are in life and in the after death state. So getting what you are, you're confronted. Often confronted with the experiences of your life, so you start to experience the life review, where you experience everything that had happened to you very, very, very rapidly. Some people say instantaneously, some people say very rapidly. Some people even report experiencing everything that happened to them through the eyes of the people, of the other people in those interactions or in those events in rooms. So not only do you experience everything you did, but you experience how it felt to the other person, what it was that you did or said to them. Good, meritorious and demeritorious, or fortunate and unfortunate. So the life review process can occur at different points for people. So some people, let's say an example is they die at peace, and they got really bright, and then they're not sure what happened. That was the dawn of the clear light, but they're not sure what happened. So there's no recollection of the clear light of God descending upon that person. Now their consciousness has reappeared, and they're seeing their body in the hospital bedroom, and they see that their family members are sad, but they also know that they had a good life, and that it was just a good life, and they're at peace. Their guides appear in the room. Hey, Bill, how's it going? It's been a while. And you're like, I don't know you. And they're like, yeah, you will. Come over here. Step into my office. And they take you into this place. And some people report that they even see it on screens, or that this experience is just transmitted into their consciousness. They have the life review. And if they're able to stay in that peace, then they're able to also see and experience peace with all the scenes of what was occurring. So that's an example of someone getting the life review pretty quickly. But an example that I shared last week of the life review of a person I know and I knew very well, was that it took time. It took a lot of time before the life review happened, in the sense that that person died in confusion and in fear, so they immediately had resonated with a simulation or a reality that reflected that, and that reflected their addiction and suffering. In the same way that your guides and your guiding intelligences are able to create these little fluctuations in the dreamscape that will attempt to provoke your lucidity, the same thing is happening in the Bardo. That these guiding intelligences are orchestrating fluctuations. They're making things not quite right, just so that you can break the simulation and that recognition can occur. The question that we may have is that, like, well, why don't they just barge the door in and help you and tell you right there that the party's over and all is good? Well, for some people, that's exactly what happens. But for other people, dying in confusion, dying in forgetfulness, dying in regret, dying now experiencing the karma that you had subjected your own mind and body to. If you abused yourself with alcohol, you suppressed your consciousness with alcohol when you were alive, then you tend to have a consciousness suppressing karma that actually is activated at the moment of death. profound, scary. How it was that you treated yourself and how it was that you treated other people, how it was that you treated consciousness is reflected in these other realities. So what happens? The guides, they're attempting to get the person to wake up. They're like right there saying like, hey, you're dead. Hey, recognize the clear light. You know, if you got the awakening teachings, they'll tell you recognize the clear light. If they're, if you didn't have that in your spelling to get you to recognize and wake up. But when that consciousness suppressing karma is active, it conditions the consciousness of that person. They can't see the being that is right there in front of them. They can't see the angelic intelligences that are right there guiding them the whole time. Why? Because the consciousness suppressing karma is clouding their vision. So you don't see the peaceful manifestations when they appear. You're not getting it. You're just trapped in this nightmare. You don't know exactly what's going on. Peaceful manifestations don't work. Your karmic vision's too deep. They're not or you're not able to see them. So what happens next? The wrathful manifestations appear. And the wrathful manifestations appear for the purpose of shocking you into wakefulness, shocking you into lucidity. In the same way that you have a frightening character in a dream or in a nightmare, it can shock you into lucidity, shock you into knowing that this is a dream, right? You awaken out of fear. That's the idea behind the wrathful manifestations. The idea is that that by wrath, you conclude, oh, this can't be real. This can't be happening. I'm either dreaming or I'm dead. And bang, the process of recognition is triggered and begins. And this, of course, is still in the transition between existences, right? I'm not referring to actually ending up in an unfortunate realm, like the animal realm or the hungry ghost realm, and now you're actually a denizen there. This is still referring to the transition or the bardo between the physical death of the body and passing on to the next existence or taking on the next form of existence. So what happens in that transitional state? Like, let's say you died in fear, you had the drug addict, you did the whole drug addict thing or the whole alcoholism thing, like very, very intensely and seriously. It really had an effect on your life. You die. Now you're in a sufferable state of confusion. Those karmas, those habits that you generated in your waking life, boom, they go into full effect. You're in confusion. You don't know what's going on. It continues. And then let's say, for example, you start to like craving for food or for sensual things or craving for drugs, craving for alcohol begins to characterize this after death transition state of consciousness. If that craving becomes sufficient for drugs, for alcohol, for these basic things, gluttony, if that predominates your consciousness enough and you're in that confusion for long enough and you're in that transition state for long enough, what happens? You end up becoming what is on your consciousness. So you experience or you take rebirth in what Buddhism calls the hungry ghost realm. not a great place to be. So, um, and yes, I've encountered many hungry ghosts, and it is truly a sufferable existence. So, um, the peaceful and wrathful manifestations uh, appear more predominantly and more clearly in the sense that they're attempting to get you to recognize your nature, recognize Mahamudra, see the clear light, recognize non-duality, union with God, all of this. They're You're very ripe for that in the few days after the body has died. It's been, say, in 49 days, but to be honest, I think by the time you get to the 49th day, a lot of the great light that has descended upon your system has dissipated. So the first few days are the most important. That's why the big timeline, like 40 days, but they'll tell you they'll leave instructions for their students: don't touch the body for 3 days, don't touch the body for 5 days, don't touch the body for 7 days. I rarely hear anything longer than 7 days, even though the full Bardo total of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is 49 days. So in that uh, golden opportunity for realization, the peaceful manifestations, the wrathful manifestations are appearing, attempting to get you to wake up out of the transition, so that your next existence can then be something that is chosen consciously. That's the thing. Chosen consciously. Whereas the situation I described to you with the use of alcohol or anything that was consciousness suppressing, the thing that goes out the door is that conscious navigation and that conscious directing. So um, yeah, peaceful and wrathful manifestations. You got the 49 days. The idea is that you would have we have to go back and check the source text, whether it's first the peaceful manifestations and then the wrathful, or if it's a peaceful and a wrathful. If you get two a day, and that gets you all the way to 100 by the end of it. I had to go back and look at that. But the the idea is that you have, in accordance with the 100 deities, uh, 42 peaceful, 58 wrathful, you have 100 opportunities to wake up. You have 100 opportunities to recognize the clear light, gain total full consciousness and realization, and then choose your next existence or appear in the Pure Land. The number 100 is of particular import and significance in the Avatamsaka Sutra, or excuse me, in the yeah, it is Avatamsaka. Yeah, Avatamsaka Sutra. There's also a contact with uh, 100 teachers or near 100 teachers. In in Islam, you have the 99 names of God, and then you have the final name, or the 100th name, is supposed to be ineffable, the name that only the masters know. So we see again and again this reference to 100 uh, as an important number, and in this in this 100 deities, it's really uh, a precious teaching in the sense that the you're prepared to make contact with uh, intelligences that ordinarily would appear already for an ordinary person undergoing death. But because this particular teaching has been received, that you're able to have that contact with those intelligences be a cause for liberation, a contact that results in liberation. So this is why the Bardo total, the Tibetan Book of the Living and Dying, or the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is considered the most precious, or one of the most precious texts and cycles of teaching in the Tibetan tradition, period. Because it takes something that would ordinarily be a sufferable process that would lead to rebirth into an opportunity for liberation. And all spiritual teachings and awakening teachings that are related to awakening do just that, even in the living, waking life. So in ordinary life without dharma, there's no non-duality, there's no unity, there's no lasting contentment, there's no understanding the greater nature of reality, there's no understanding or grasping of destiny, there's no ascertaining of destiny, there's no seeing into the mechanics of consciousness states. There's no wisdom as to realizing that everything that appears is awake or is illumination. You know, that's not in ordinary. It's not the program for 98% of 99.5% of people on the planet. Maybe probably a lot more than that. But life is the same for everyone. The five aggregates are the same for everyone. Everyone sees, everyone hears, everyone tastes, everyone touches, everyone feels, everyone thinks, everyone's reality. It's all consciousness. But without the teachings that give these pointers that allow for this recognition, without the totality of the samadhis of the Buddhas, life is just an endless cycle of rebirth, an endless cycle of craving with no end. I just said the same thing twice. It's just a perpetual cycle of pain. And in the same way that life can be a perpetual cycle of pain, death, dying can be a perpetual cycle of pain. So the victors, the Buddhas, the masters of consciousness, of reality, created this teaching, this cycle, clothed it in Tibetan forms and Tibetan mantras. But this same teaching, this same process applies in other reality systems, applies in other existences. It just looks Tibetan because that's how it is here. That's how it was transmitted into this specific culture at this specific time. But the capacity for the guru principle, or the capacity for the awakened nature to essentially scoop up beings out of their mire of suffering is not a Tibetan thing. It's a reality thing. It just happens to be the case that the Tibetans wrote this down. They received it, wrote it down, explained how it works. But the mechanics are very much so not Tibetan. These themes are very universal, and we'll be exploring them in the sixth Bardo cycle. Wow. Okay. So that concludes our class for today.